Welcome to today's episode of the Hot and Steamy podcast. We'd like to first recognize our sponsors, Kelly Garza of Steamy Chick and Kimberly Ann Johnson of MAGA Mamas. Follow them on Instagram at Steamy Chick and at MAGA Mamas.
Hot, steamy, hot, steamy, hot, steamy, hot, steamy, hot, steamy, hot, steamy.
So we are so excited to have with us today one of my most favorite people in the whole wide world. The wonderful, the beautiful, the brilliant Piper Sunshine Lovemore. Listen,
you're too kind.
Piper is one of the smartest people that I've ever met. So I'm so excited to ask her all the questions and get all the answers.
Yeah.
And she's just sort of like what I like to call the Birthworker Extraordinaire.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much.
But let me give you her official bio, or one of many official bios I hear. Piper Lovemore is a birth worker on a mission. Mm-hmm. Her goal, to empower families around the globe to navigate their birth experiences with confidence and pleasure. To that end, she has pursued certification as a Lamaze educator, a doula, and a midwife, spending countless hours in service to the parturient population.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So, together with her husband, Chaz.
Shout out, Chaz.
What up, Chaz?
Yes, all the shout outs. He is the MVP.
Yeah, actually, why don't I just read his part too? I was going to skip it, but you guys are a team.
Definitely an important part.
Yeah. Chaz Lovemore is an audio engineer by trade and a birth educator by necessity. Mm-hmm. This is a quote. I realized that most dads had no idea what I was talking about. Most of them were terrified, and I felt that this was unacceptable. So true. End quote. So true.
Right. Very Chaz.
Yes. Having been transformed by his first birth experience, he sought to encourage other partners to discover the power of their presence in the birth space by speaking directly to their unique concerns. Together with Piper, he has worked to craft a unique childbirth education experience that both prepares and inspires expectant parents. Piper and Chaz have enjoyed, this says 5 free births. Should I say 6?
Well, the 6th has yet to take place, but coming very soon.
Yes.
Stay tuned.
They've enjoyed 5 free births, soon to be 6 free births, since their orgasmic birth delivery. They now live, love, and explore in Hawaii with their 6 free learning children. Yay!
Mm-hmm. Yay! Adventure!
Yes. And I had the opportunity to visit you in your natural habitat.
And you survived!
I thrived. Listen, I thrived. I had the best time of my life. It was so fabulous being with all you guys.
So wonderful having you, and they're still wondering when you're coming back.
Soon.
Is it tomorrow?
Girl. You know we're moving to LA. But then we'll be closer.
Well, I have to say that they kind of said that you have to bring Mikey next time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Gotta do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yes.
Can't wait.
So, Pipes, is there anything in that bio, or is there anything else you want our audiences to know about you that isn't included in the bio? Because, of course, that doesn't even start to tell all of who you are.
You know what I would add is that right now I'm focusing especially on the act of decolonizing birthwork. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited about how much progress that conversation seems to be making right now. It's like at an accelerated pace. That's always been an undercurrent of my work. It sort of took on the phrasing of like accessibility initially, but I think that really when we look at what barriers are to access, we can't run away from the decolonization conversation. So I'm really excited about how that is being pulled into focus these days. And that to me is important because a lot of people focus on birthwork as a trade or as a professional pursuit. And I certainly understand that and support that. I mean, we got to eat, but I also don't want to see it as divorced from a community setting. And so for me, the act of empowering families to really be present and participant in their birth is also an act of reclaiming the entire birth cycle for the community. And that calls even non-birthing partners and village members into the conversation. So that's my current area of, my consistent but current area of extreme focus. Just drawing everybody into the conversation, not necessarily centering the financial piece, but more the empowerment piece.
Okay.
And that just decolonized parenting and decolonized birthing sounds like a book title, like a book series. Like
shameless
manuals.
Plug. That's actually the title of our podcast, Decolonized Parenting. I partner with a friend and mentee of mine who's expecting her third baby and will be enjoying her second free birth coming up soon.
Yay.
And so we wanted a space where we could just kind of get into the nitty gritty. And we've just launched our first episode, still working out some of the sound kinks, the benefits of having an audio partner. We cannot not have it popping.
Congratulations on the launch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
but please do look out for that.
Yeah. We'll listen and promote. Just let us know.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. All right. So, will you talk a little bit about what kind of services you provide in the birthwork space?
Absolutely. And I like that you said the birthwork space. I'm really embracing that term birth worker right now in an effort to sort of integrate all of the practices that I've been able to cultivate over time, but also just to not isolate each aspect. So I started off as an educator, and I think that is still one of my most important roles, and sort of falls out of my mouth whether or not I've been officially asked to do that. I definitely moved from there into full spectrum doula support. So I've been able to assist people from fertility, conception, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, also pregnancy loss and abortion. All of those things I think are just part of the reproductive cycle. So reproductive doula, I guess. Midwife, I have had the honor of catching many babies coming in and actually not catching more often, which is more my style of practice. I really love to reserve that for the parents. I'm there mindful eye and can help with instruction if necessary, but they're not hitting the floor, Mikey.
I thought you were fumbling. You were just like not catching. I was like,
that's not a fumble. That's like, just a seeding of the honor really belongs with the family, in my opinion, where it's where they share that sentiment.
Yeah, that's real.
So yeah, doing that, and then also I love to counsel families on nutrition and related practices, how to do their own self-care, how to do couple and partner care, how to define boundaries that are clear, because as we are sort of reclaiming some of these pathways, folks find it challenging to integrate into their social setting with these different views. So there's a lot of counseling that happens around that, helping people to carry the empowerment that they found through the birth practice into their life.
Wow.
Moving
I didn't
forward.
realize that piece was so involved.
Okay.
It really is. And it's interesting because that's sort of the silent labor of birth workers, I find. We end up extending relationships with clients a lot as they start to navigate that stuff. One of the benefits of having home birth or birth in a home setting is that usually your practitioner is with you for the first 6 weeks. And that's not like an isolated visit at 6 weeks, but several visits in that first 6 week span. And so people feel really powerful and empowered by the experience, but then after that it's time to integrate back into their outside life, and I don't think people are often prepared for how much pushback they'll receive for minor choices or for their major choices. I also find that a lot of families are experiencing that if they're choosing a home birth prior to giving birth. You want to do it at home? Why? Are you sure that's safe? And people need their decisions and their spirits sort of fortified around those choices so that they can offset the natural vulnerability that comes with that cycle. So that's a big part of it. I choose not to diminish that aspect. I've definitely been loving incorporating peri-steaming into my practice. It's been a wonderful aspect. I'm not a certified yoni steamer, but I'm definitely an avid advocate. And I will say, I guess, all things sort of sexy taboo, because there are many things that relate to our reproductive health that have been taboos that I'm happy to discuss and normalize within the community.
Yeah. And that's such a big deal. Like, with a lot of our guests, I've just been asking, if they'd be willing to share their journey into motherhood. And it's, it seems like they're excited to talk about it, but then they don't always have they're trying to choose the appropriate wording for an unknown audience.
Right.
Yes.
And it's just giving, that's just a tiny peek into what actually is happening there. Like all the things we don't have a model for discussing in not just public spaces, but private spaces too. Like, are we allowed to talk about this with our friends? Is this normal? Is it not? Is it okay? Is it not?
There's this constant sense of calibration, and I definitely struggled with that early on as a birth worker, and now I'm becoming more comfortable with that just because I'm often sought out, for those conversations. So I realize that if I'm the safe space, then I can't sort of tiptoe around a lot of these issues. Yeah. But also, that's part of the decolonization in my mind. Let's really unpack what our boundaries are in discussing some of these things. It is now, we're no longer able to deny how intrinsically related they are to our health. And so if it's a part of our being healthy, then let's demystify, let's reclaim, let's get comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, nothing can be, I'm sorry, my niece is dancing behind you. Nothing can be handled until we start examining it and discussing it. As long as it's inside of our heads and not made solid we can't really look at all the aspects of it and really decide what we think if we're not talking.
I think that's an important conversation for those of us around the reproductive cycle to have as well, because once people are in that space, they are just more vulnerable, hormonally. I mean, this is something that my partner and I teach, that is actually part of the grand design of reproduction, that you should become more vulnerable in that reproductive space, because it's supposed to allow you to transmute energies that have lain stagnant in your subconscious, or even maybe hidden away in your conscious for too long. And so the way we sort of demonstrate that is there's a whole human inside your body, if you're carrying the baby, who's hey, see that stuff up there? Do you want to get that cleared out so you can make some room to take up some space in your memories and in your, in your heart? So let's just dump that. Yeah. And, we too often sort of malign pregnant people for being tearful and emotional. But in fact, that fluidity is such a gift and it's such a tool to use. And also, pregnant partners don't really get away from that. We don't really give them any space, right? They're almost supposed to be more stalwart in the face of all of this emotional upheaval. But in fact, they catch those vibes too. Yeah. And so use that. That fluidity is designed to help you flush out stuff. And so I think that it's important that we have these conversations before we enter that space, so that we have a more comfortable container for people who are really living into that physical reality of vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think we're not entirely unfamiliar with that. We had a challenge early in our relationship where, both my parents are therapists. And when I went to go talk with them about it, they were just it sounds like you're getting an opportunity to become vulnerable. And a lot of people think that vulnerable is weakness, but vulnerability is actually your greatest strength, because it means that you can change without breaking, or that you can break open in order to change.
Which is so incredibly important for parenting, and so much of this work that we do is a precursor to that grand job that lies ahead. Vulnerability is, you can't escape it in parenting. Unfortunately, some people try to overcorrect, in ways that end up being potentially damaging. But if you're open to that, to being molded, it's an incredible experience. I mean, you learn so much.
Yeah.
It's mutual.
Yeah. And it was what I was most terrified of. Like in sort of taking our relationship to the next level. This was like, it happened when we were preparing to like head into getting married and stuff. And I was terrified of being vulnerable to a man, you know, like becoming dependent in any way on one. And it really allowed us. Yeah. So that can be, I think that's something that can be familiar. It doesn't mean we're ready for it. It doesn't mean it'll be easy, but I feel like we'll recognize it.
Yeah.
When it comes.
And even if we don't, I feel like we're surrounded by people who'll be like, hey, pay attention.
Yeah.
Notice what's happening.
I mean, the main thing is just to not run from it. Sometimes sometimes it's too much to hold in the moment and you loop back to it, you know, but I think that right now just doing away with preconceived notions around it. You know, like society teaches us to roll our eyes at a weepy pregnant person.
Right.
Yeah.
And so just resisting that inclination or that prescription is already doing the work, you know?
True.
Maybe it's like more than you have the capacity for in that moment, but honoring the fact that there was something valid there that we want to loop back to is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not emasculating in any way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about how you came to this work? Like what brought you into becoming the Birthworker Extraordinaire?
You know, that question is funny for me because I would say like my own birth experiences, but I really think that it began with my own birth, actually. I think that my mom and my parents really helped to set me up on this path, though it's probably not what they would have chosen for me. But my mom had a really empowered birth experience. I was her third, and she had also gone through a cycle of very conservative births to a then very sort of liberal birth, I guess, with me. I was born in a birth center with midwives. And so I always had a very birth positive upbringing in the conversation. My parents were also really very focused on being really sex positive with my sibling and I. So it wasn't a taboo that couldn't be discussed, and it wasn't riddled with like angst and discomfort. And so I think that really set me up to be really open to it all. And I always looked forward to it and expected birth to be a positive, transformative experience. So that was the initial introduction. Then I grew up in Germany, and Europe is also a typically much more sex-positive environment.
Yeah.
Also, when it comes to birth specifically, they do things much more physiologically oriented than we seem to experience here in the U.S. So I had several friends in high school who were pregnant and giving birth, and had the opportunity to walk through that with them. I had never heard of a doula. I'm not really even sure if the term was, dating myself here, but if the term was even popular then. But I was just super interested and was already that friend who people could talk to. You know, people would disclose their pregnancies or their pregnancy scares with me and know that they would find a non-judgmental audience. And so that was a lot of practice that set me up for this. And I was just able to observe birth in a more natural setting. Hospital-based still, but just really birth positive. So then, fast forward to my own birth. At this point, my own first birth. At this point, I had been with my partner for almost 10 years, and we had had a bunch of transformative experiences together that just put us in a really close space. He had also welcomed his first child several years before, and had not really been front and center to that experience. So hadn't necessarily come to grips with the idea of being a centered partner in that. And I was kind of like, well, hold up. Birth is going to be awesome. You're going to want to be right there. We're going to totally do this together like we do everything else. And sought care that would affirm that for us. And that was a journey, you know, because I was like a student. We didn't have a whole lot of money and didn't necessarily have some of the privileges that would line people right up with the tools that they needed. So we had to be proactive in seeking them out. And ended up having a really wonderful experience through serendipity and conscious intention. And then I remember just juxtaposing that feeling of triumph and empowerment. I know I'm being repetitive with that word, but it's just so true, to what everyone else was telling us about how we should be feeling, what people were projecting on us. Mm-hmm. And I realized that the balance was just off. Mm-hmm. Sorry. So I wanted to delve into that. There seemed like there was this sort of cognitive dissonance happening that mystified me. And the more that I learned about it, the more that I felt like I had to do something about it. That it hadn't been a miracle. It hadn't been a crazy stroke of luck that aligned us with where we were, but just a little bit of intention and then some serendipity, sure. And so I wanted to be able to figure out how to recreate that for people. And I thought what it did for us as new parents together was the most important outcome. That if people can go through this cycle and feel so solid coming out the other side, then you will will help to root in your relationship in a new way. And it'll help to fortify you for the sleepless nights of parenthood and the things that people complain about that to us were just kind of like amazing, awesome opportunities. So that's why I started wanting to become an educator, learning more and wanting to share. And then I just felt like I started having students who would ask me if I could just bring that vibe. Can you hold that thought and bring it into my birth space? And to learn how to be better equipped to do that and bring that vibe with them. So I started doing the doula work, which then bled into doing some midwifery work. And then that sort of felt like the perfect harmony between all of those things. Here I can be an educator and also directly impact the container within which you'll birth. So that was sort of the arc that led me to where I am today, really just wanting to heal the world.
And make it a better place. I love it. Okay.
Let me ask this question. What do you love most about doing this work?
Good question.
I love witnessing the transformation of families. I love whatever shape they take on. I work with single moms. I work with partners and families who've had a number of children beforehand. And I love the fact that they kind of come out of this space with this unfuckwittable attitude. And I feel like that is really meant to be the birthright of that transition. And so it's just really affirming to watch it take place. And I can't really claim that as my own. That is something that families earn going through the process. But I'm really grateful to be able to fortify that for them. That's the dope thing, because I know those little people are going to grow up in a place that feels more comfortable, that feels more affirming, that those parents may encounter things, as they raise those children that are going against what society prescribes, but they feel just confident in supporting them. That's the global healing that I see coming out of it. So it's just neat to witness that transformation take place.
Yeah. And then what do you find challenging or most challenging about this work?
I would say the challenges for me have been personal, like personal management. I mean, I'm expecting our 7th baby. They're homeschooled. They've been through it with us, and I love that. But I'm now just in this pregnancy, really tasking myself to sort of recalibrate my output versus my quiet times. I've been in this game long enough now to loop back. I think a lot of folks, when they start off, are so gung-ho and passionate that they're just like, no, I want to do all the things all the time. And I've definitely been that one. I've done births like a week before giving birth to my own babies, and been right back catching babies when I had, a couple week old person in my own baby pack. And I love that. But for sustainability, I'm trying to sort of retool some of those boundaries. And that's hard because I'm passionate about it. And it's one of those things where if you're not there for the birth, you're just not there for the birth. We can't reschedule and do it next week.
Right. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Completely. Okay. So Kelly was telling us that lay midwives have been outlawed recently in Hawaii. Or they haven't been outlawed, but they're not allowed to practice. Can you talk a little bit about how that's impacting your work and the women who make up your clientele and just sort of the community in general?
Sure. The legislative process in Hawaii around regulating midwives has been underway for several years.
Okay.
And I have been a part of this struggle since it cropped up in its more recent form about 7 years ago. Every year it comes back up when, on the state assembly, and we have to debate it, and the community comes out in droves, really speaking up for their traditional midwives. It's been really awesome being a part of this part that I think is happening nationally, really, here in Hawaii, because there's such a depth of cultural resonance with practices. Mm-hmm. And so the community has spoken up in ways that I think are just really awesome to observe. Right now, it hasn't directly impacted the practice just yet, because the suspend state on the law that passed is 2020.
Okay.
But we have been actively sort of scrambling to try to carve out space for us to continue practicing the way that we want to, and really the way that the community would like for us to be able to support them.
Yeah.
So that means a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest challenges with regulation of midwifery is this imposition of obstetrical guidelines that are really just very different from midwifery practice.
Mm-hmm.
And they are rooted in a hospital-based paradigm. And the challenge there is that birth is not the same in those different environments. And so when you impose the structure of one setting onto a different, usually more organic setting, you end up not only canceling out some of the magic, unfortunately, but in my opinion, also increasing the risk there. Yeah. And so it's kind of an apples and oranges conversation. Yeah. And it's been very difficult trying to validate our practices in the eyes of a practice that doesn't really seem to be interested. Mm-hmm. It all seems very mystical and witchy, mm-hmm. to medically trained people who are coming from that perspective. But there's just so much that we are able to see and feel and observe that is not a part of their reality. Mm-hmm. So I would say one of the biggest challenges has been sort of translating these two realities and trying to make them mesh. Mm-hmm. Where there's a lot of resistance. Mm-hmm. What is the way that it has impacted the community, though, is very interesting. Not only are we seeing a rise in free birthing, people who are just saying, screw it. If you're going to regulate me, I'll do it all by myself and I don't want anybody's input.
Wow. Okay.
But we're also seeing more, there's an uptick. I work with a partner, and she and I are both, have both chosen not to certify simply because we don't want some of the restrictions that are imposed on registered midwives.
Right.
And we find people seeking us out now. And I think that the cat's sort of creeping out of the bag, that there are other ways of managing. We don't even really, managing is sort of a word that doesn't quite fit, but whatever. But there are other ways of holding space. And I think that that people don't necessarily know the details of the nuances, but are interested in choosing the method that seems most expansive so that they can preserve the most options for themselves. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's interesting is also to hear the rhetoric from the more medical paradigm becoming more conservative and sort of more actively maligning some of our practices, which is also not incredibly well informed, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So here, we're leaving the state of Georgia, my home, but
Fila.
Right. Always come back to you. So I learned recently that there's really only one birth center that isn't a hospital setting here. And that I, being 40 years old, am not eligible. They wouldn't take me there because I'm a high-risk pregnancy or I will be a high risk pregnancy. And so that started me thinking about options. Like, wait, I'm limited? How come? Like, how?
Well,
I don't get it. So now, like, I've just been interested, like, who else is limited and why are we so limited?
Right.
And the options available to us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so that is part of what I'm speaking of as far as institutional ways of looking at this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with midwives, and it's, I'm speaking in terms of someone who has lived and practiced in Hawaii for the last decade. I know that this is different on the mainland as regulation is sort of more the norm there. But that is certainly one way that the institutions sort of influence this whole spectrum of a family's life, really.
Yeah.
I don't want you, and I would caution you against adopting the phrasing that you are high risk,
Thank you.
because you are not inherently. There is, because of a set of statistics, and, we have to even do the work of like checking out the studies and looking how well they were done and who they were performed on and what the methodology was.
Mm-hmm.
But, we have this information that has then allowed them to draw a circle around a group and claim that it is, a riskier population, and then create rules that would affect you before you even conceive, before we've even checked in about any of your other actual health factors.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is one of the drawbacks of that sort of mode of thinking. I would much rather be able to greet my clients where they are, look at their total health, look at their practices, look at what their support is. When we have the opportunity to work with someone preconception, those are factors that we can also influence.
Mm-hmm.
But often we work with people who have already conceived, and we can still sort of take a look at what their actual health profile looks like. In the practice that I work with, we regularly have women who are over 40 and don't see any more adverse outcomes among that demographic than any other. And a lot of that has to do with physiological management of birth, because another thing that comes along with the institutions is a whole bunch of preset management that is not necessarily individualized for your experience and for what's happening with you, but it's just the protocol. It's just what is done.
Just a one size fits all type
is an
of
empowering.
approach. So it's just a one size fits all type approach to it, right?
Exactly. A one size fits all approach, which we know doesn't work for clothes, doesn't work for birth.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will say this: when it does work for clothing, it's usually very loose and comfortable and not necessarily rigid.
It flows. It flows. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Baby, do you have a question you want to ask?
No, I just appreciate that conversation. I appreciate that vantage point, just because, Jean-Ray hears me all the time. I just have this belief that the vast majority of people who work in Western medicine are like C students, like they passed a test, and they aren't remarkable
Healers.
Humans. You know what I'm saying? Like they are very basic people, and they've learned these things, and they, regurgitate the stuff that they've learned, and so they're not necessarily. I feel my personal opinion is that the vast majority of people working in this medical field are not necessarily interested in finding solutions to people's actual issues. They're not interested in actually working to maintain the health or improve the health of whoever the patient is. They're just working, And so
yes,
I appreciate it.
I see that happening. And I think that there are individuals who get in who really do want to advance change, obviously.
Of course.
The infamous not all.
Right.
But this is one of the reasons why I like to focus on the institution rather than the individual, because really going through med school is an indoctrination process.
Exactly.
It is designed to be that way through things like sleep and food deprivation. You know, I mean, a lot of med students are living in absolute poverty and can't afford to eat between classes, and they just want to do whatever I need to do to pass this one test so I can get on to the next phase. And so even though they may have come in with some zeal about being able to be beneficial to their community, just the process of surviving the indoctrination sort of breeds some of that out of you. And then the institutions themselves are designed to serve themselves, right? And so people who offer other views and who want to pursue other methods that may be less profitable, because let's bring the profit structure in, are usually not finding themselves in a sustainable job. Like, they are private practice folks, you know what I mean? The institution itself isn't really very supportive of that type of innovative thinking. And it's interesting to me because we, especially as it pertains to birth work, we're in that cycle where we will start doing something, and then like 15 to 20 years later, there's a study published that says, hey, guess what? This is totally cool now. And then we still have another 15 years before that becomes the actual practice, because you have to get to like through the trial period and have enough people buying in, and then get all the way to teaching it in med school. And, you know, so there's a crazy delay. And that's one of the reasons why the decolonization process is so important to me. It's just a shortcut. And I think in my personal life, you know, my partner and I, as we were preparing for our first free birth, it was definitely not the movement that it has become now. And we were sort of piecemealing clues, you know, we were like adventure hunting our way through old literature and just nerding out and finding like, what is the default setting? Someone said to me when I was carrying my first baby and was just balancing life and studies with this impending awesomeness, that I should just look in my ancestral tree and know that, you know, the women that came before me in my line weren't afforded the luxury of prenatal care and attention, whatever form it came in, and that they might be, you know, expected to squat in the middle of their workday and have their baby and then resume their work responsibilities very quickly thereafter. And yet here I still am, you know, and was able to persist throughout the generations. And so that really made me think that there's something inherently right about the way our bodies do this, that we are designed to do this. And if I could stay closer to more traditional methods and not necessarily center tools and gadgets and outside needs, but rather focus on what I had inherently to get the job done, that I would probably be okay. And that has just proven true over and over again. You know, we've gotten things that we like and want, but the more babies we have, the less stuff we feel like we need to get. You know what I mean? We're like, oh, we got this, and we have some stuff left over from the last time.
That's like a lesson for life in general. Like, you have everything you need, you know?
You have everything you need. And that has really been the focus. And so it's, you know, it's interesting because even when I started doing peri-steaming with my clients, you know, initially I was like, this is so cool. And I like to do it with people who I know and I'm comfortable with. But if I'm going to offer this as a service to my clientele, it needs to look a certain way. And then I came back to that you have everything you need notion and started thinking, you know what? Nope, I'm going to bring the herbs. But pretty much everybody has something they can sit on and something we can boil water in. And if I do this in a way that I use what the clients have in their home already, then I'm demystifying this self-care practice and I'm making it accessible. You can do it with what you got. You don't have to go out and get anything extra. You can if you want to, and if you want to invest in yourself and in your experience in that way. But I don't want it to seem like some removed, commodified tool when really it's something that we have been using forever to care for ourselves. And so that philosophy flies directly in the face of institutionalized medicine because it really does divorce it from profit. You know?
Yeah, totally. When I started steaming when I lived in Seoul, and it was just common practice. And then I was able to continue in LA because it's like Soul Junior. And then when I moved to England, there was like no Koreans and no Korean anything. And I rigged something up so quick. Like I just put 2 chairs next to each other and sat with one leg on one chair and one on the other and put a little pot underneath, covered.
Little crack in between.
Yeah. Yeah. I got it done. I got it done. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Or you can just, stand over it. Or you can kneel up, a pillow.
So many different ways. And people are amazed. Like, oh, I had this. Oh, I can just use this thing. And then there's also the concept of like taboos, right? Oh my gosh, but if I use this for my vagina, I probably should never use it again for anything else. And it's like, girl, it's okay.
Old food, old eggs sitting on that plate, and you just washed it and ate off it. Like, come on. Yeah.
Exactly. So that I think is also comes back to the empowerment then. Like, actually, it's not nasty and your body is not flawed and gross.
Right.
You know what I'm like? We can, soap and water is a miracle worker. And let's get all these things back under the same umbrella. These are our tools and this is our total health,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
Totally.
I think, Mikey, you're right on. I mean, I love that you were able to say those words and not me, but I don't think you're wrong at all. It's unfortunate that people, I think that it's unfortunate that people feel so resistant to being more radical in promoting change. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that is just, unfortunately, where capitalism positions us, right? Nobody necessarily wants to be the whistleblower if it means their family might not eat.
Yeah.
So,
for real.
Yeah. Piper, have you steamed after any of your births? Personally?
I haven't yet. And I'm so looking forward to doing it this time.
Yay. Okay.
I definitely didn't, I've done it for a lot of my clients. Mm-hmm. And I definitely can tout the benefits and believe wholeheartedly in it as a postpartum practice, but hadn't really come into it when I last gave birth 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago.
I was like, we've been married 2 years, so.
Yeah. It's been a little bit longer than that. Oh my gosh. And if you were to talk with her, you'd be like, it must easily 14 years ago.
Totally.
She's so great. Oh.
Yeah, she's the best. Okay, so have you had a chance to read the 4th trimester vaginal steam study?
I have. I'm a fan. I love the methodology. And I'm excited to see all the information compiled in such a format that is translatable for folk.
Yeah, the school nerd in me was like, oh, look at this.
Shout out to the graphics, too. I love the graphics.
Woo-hoo.
Thank you. I was just looking back over it again as I prepared, and I was like, this is so great. I love how it so reflects. It's subtle nerdgasming.
Thank you. The little womb measurement. That was my favorite.
Yeah. And like the cells, and you were talking about the lochia, like all of it is just great.
Thank you. So after reading the study, what were your bless you. After reading the study, what were your first thoughts? Like beyond like, oh, this is great. But like, what were some of the things that occurred to you? Like, what would you want me to know about this study? Like, what kind of feedback would you give?
Okay, well, those are 2 different things. So I'll tell you what first occurred to me was interesting because I'm constantly in this gap right now with the whole concept, with the whole conversation around decolonizing.
Yeah.
I was in that space of like, here we have something that is an incredible tool and that will help us as we deal with the sort of outside scrutiny. And yet, I don't necessarily need these numbers to tell me that this is awesome. You know what I mean? I trust it just because, honestly, I'm a little bit biased towards resources that seem like they have a connection to some indigeneity over some institutionalism, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I was really glad to have the information. I thought that it was well done, well written, well presented. I was curious about some of the choices that were made as far as measurements. And I really loved the transparency of the study, that there were, a lot of times when we read these type of medical, this isn't necessarily medical, but things from the medical perspective, I'm sorry, I'm getting over a little something.
Okay.
It's kind of predictable, the arc that it's going to take. You almost feel like they wouldn't have published the study if it didn't say what they wanted it to say, right?
Yeah.
And so with this, I thought it was really interesting to see the fluctuation of outcomes over the postpartum period. And of course, the end result was what I expected, that it was a healthy population of women. But I really liked the fact that it was clear that it wasn't completely linear in every context. And I like that because it leaves room for some of the other variables that happen postpartum with people. So
Yeah.
I like that aspect.
It was interesting. Originally, there were quite a few more women who volunteered to be involved. But a number of them weren't able to have vaginal birth, or they didn't have vaginal birth. So then they were disqualified from the study. And then a few others weren't able to keep up the appointments. And so then they, so we ended up with about 12 participants. But even that was interesting. Okay, now we have 20 women to work with. And then it was, even that was like, nope, this is a variable. You don't have 20 women to work with. And then there were so many things that we didn't, I wasn't part of the design, but that the team didn't see coming. Like, one of the things that they really wanted to measure was whether or not steaming assisted with production of breast milk. And those findings were so inconclusive. Like, we honestly couldn't even, the data couldn't be put into something that I could show visually, It was really interesting. It was really interesting.
Oh, I think we had a little hiccup. You got frozen. Data couldn't be put into something you could show visually.
Yeah. And I just said it was really interesting.
Well, I thought that for something like that, it actually might help to even do a longer trajectory in the study, like up to 3 months. 6 months is definitely the typical postpartum recovery period, especially from the Western paradigm. But in terms of breast milk production and the fluctuations in the makeup of breast milk, it might be helpful to study even over a longer period. And I thought that it was interesting that the numbers did what I sort of anticipated them to do by the 6-week mark, but I would still be interested in seeing how it went over a longer period of time, especially for women whose menses returned, because for people who are breastfeeding, often it will stay, their periods will stay gone for up to a year or beyond that. So it's not necessarily something you can always measure, but for some people within that first 3-month cycle, it will return. And I was curious what that would look like after having steamed. I think that people are also much more aware of their bodies after giving birth. And so for people who are doing it for the first time, their feedback will probably be much more involved than it might have been had they been steaming even prior to giving birth. The sensations, you're just cued in a different way.
Yeah, and I understand that some of the study designers wanted to include also like an emotional aspect so that we could sort of understand where and how and what spaces postpartum depression sort of creeps in and its many manifestations. But it ended up kind of being outside of the scope. Like, with a foundational study, you need to really keep it simple. So...
Well, that's another thing that would vary, because you had people who had birthed in the hospital and who had birthed at home. And so that indicates some very different care paradigms. And we already see differences in postpartum mental health based on those two paradigms. One of the biggest differences just being that in a traditional medical or hospital birth, you have care immediately following the birth, like in that first 48 hours. And then often people aren't seen again until that 6-week checkup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas with home-based care with a midwife, you're usually seen 5 or 6 times, in that window, which can definitely influence postpartum mental health. I mean, obviously there are other factors like hormones and diet and support, but just having someone attuned to and directing your own attention to self-care so diligently is going to have an effect.
Yeah. So what do you think the implications are for this study and its findings, like for the greater society. Like, what can this study tell us about where we
first
could
of all,
go?
I think it's a really great tool for birth workers because peri-steaming is now trending in a different way. People will be met with skepticism, and it's really nice to have something concrete to reference. That is, having a study is very much the language of the medical paradigm, right? And so just having it done sort of lends it validity, which I think is awesome. And I think for birth workers who are just flirting with the idea, it's also nice to have something to hold on to that makes them feel like this is actually relevant and substantiated, in a way. And that's that whole straddling paradigms aspect. So I feel like that's a really helpful tool. I think that, it really depends on which culture you're addressing. Again, I live in Hawaii, so it's not as foreign to a lot of people here.
Right.
There are a lot of Korean women, a lot of Korean spas, but also it's really common in Japanese culture and a lot of other places. And so whether it's steam or fumigation, it depends on the environment. But I think overall, just allowing peri-steaming to enter the conversation from a really sort of validated point of view is really great. And I hope that it will continue to move us forward. One of the things that I think that happens for people who aren't even necessarily interested in steaming themselves is this awakening to different ways of caring for self. Like some people might not necessarily be drawn to steaming, but think, well, what else did I not know about that I could be doing? Which is, I'm seeing people being excited about bringing it in with other modalities, massage practitioners who want to offer it, acupuncturists who want to offer it, even nutritionists who are accustomed to working with those herbs. And now excited about a different way to apply them. Which I think is really awesome. So I feel like the normalization there is really cool.
We got to start getting them in some barbershops.
Yeah, are you kidding? 2 for 1. You could be steaming while you're getting a hair trim.
A hot shave and a hot seat.
Yep. That's the name of the shop right there, the hot seat.
The hot seat.
Piper, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Piper.
You're so welcome. Are we done already?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I know. We're done.
You're definitely going to be back on the show.
Oh,
we've got so much more to talk about.
Oh my gosh, maybe I'll be cradling someone else, special guest by then.
Yes. Has the name game started?
Not yet. I need to put, we do a thing on Facebook every time, and I haven't done that yet. So we can't wait to see what we get this time. We are actually truly baffled. I can't even say I have an idea yet.
Really?
But yeah, next time I'll invite my partner on. Maybe you will invite my partner on, and he can share his experience with the birth.
Yes.
Probably be on the side.
Yeah.
But there is one thing I wanted to say about the study.
Yes,
before
please.
we completely conclude that part.
Yes, please.
And that is that all of the outcomes, all of the different categories that were measured showed a positive benefit to steaming, which is predictable in my opinion.
Right.
I expected that much. But what I wanted to add for listeners is that is just for the person who's receiving that care. It's wonderful that they feel more whole. And I feel like it's important to say that because we live in this society that wants your snapback game to be on 100. And what comes right behind that is expecting a birthing person to resume pre-birth activities sooner. And so I just want to stress that while it is wonderful to feel more whole and more vibrant in your body in a more rapid fashion, it is not necessarily, doesn't translate to then having to get back out and do stuff. So please don't take this idea of like, great, this is going to accelerate my postpartum recovery so I can get back to what I need to do, because the postpartum period is still very sacred, very gentle, and should be addressed, in my opinion, with patience and for the grand unfolding that is still taking place. So it's just wonderful to feel more resilient and stronger in your body sooner so that you're not sort of languishing through that postpartum space. But I would really caution people from taking the leap to then feeling like that is going to get them back to work faster, or get them back to their, one of the elements, for instance, was waist size. And like, who doesn't want to feel like they got their, their stuff back in order however they wanted to feel sooner? But that's not so that you need to be in your bikini competition next month. It's just nice to know that you're feeling like your body is coming back into what you experience as a healthy state sooner. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. It didn't even occur to me. But of course it can be misconstrued into that space. Of course it can. Of course it can. Yeah, thank you. That was wonderful.
Yeah, hey, I love you guys. Thank you for having me.
We love you.
Time.
Yes, yeah. We could talk to you forever.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Wait, so where can the listeners find you? And
Okay, so I feel like I'm always saying this, that I'm retooling my offerings, yada yada, but my current main focus is our Decolonized Parenting podcast, and we're also on Instagram at Decolonized Parenting, Facebook, all the social media platforms. And if you want to find me personally, I'm on Insta as Grand Multi-Piper, play on words. And my partner is on there as Prolific Papa Lovemore. And so you can definitely find us on social in that way. But tune in to the podcast, because we'll be talking about some of these ideas around just decolonizing parenting and all the related things.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we love you so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hot and Steamy podcast. Feedback is gold, so please like, comment, share, and subscribe. This podcast was made possible by our sponsors, Kelly Garza of Steamy Chick and Kimberly Ann Johnson of Magamamas. Visit our website for more information on them and our other guests, to view extras, and to purchase merch. That's www.hotsteamypodcast.com. www.hotsteamypodcast.com.